Oh, stop.
Sean Cosby is an Anthony Award-winning writer from southeastern Virginia. He is the author of the New York Times-bestseller Razorblade Tears and Blacktop Wasteland, which won the Los Angeles Times Book Prize, was a New York Times notable book, and was named the Best Book of the Year by NPR, The Guardian, and Library Journal, among others. When not writing, he is an avid hiker and chess player. Please join me in welcoming Sean Cosby.
I just put the chess thing in there to sound smart. So
Now, Sean, this was a great book. I really, really enjoyed it. And when you first started writing it, what was the main theme or story that you were trying to convey to the reader here?
So when I first started the book, I really was writing it about police corruption and police brutality. I started it right after the murder of George Floyd, so I was trying to work on talking about that through a crime novel. And I found out pretty quickly that I didn't have enough distance from the issue to give it the sort of due diligence it deserved. And so then I had to kind of shift gears because I had this character in the main character, Titus Crown, that I really liked. I thought it was an interesting character. And so I started to shift it into talking about small town politics and religion. And, you know, with Southern fiction, I think there's four like main pillars of Southern fiction. Yeah. It's class, race, sex, and religion. And so I wanted to sort of incorporate all those together in one book. I never really had, even all my books are set in the South, I don't think I really sort of embraced that sort of cloak of Southern Gothic fiction. And so with this one, I really wanted to like embrace that. And so I decided to switch it from an investigation of a crime by the police to an investigation of a serial murder that happens in this town and how it affects everyone in the town, including Titus. So that was sort of how the story, the genesis of the story started. And then it went in other directions that I hadn't expected, but that's always cool.
So you started with the prologue about the county. Now, let me know if I'm saying it right. Is it Sharon County? Sharon County. What was your inspiration behind writing about this particular county and the history you describe?
So one of my favorite books is Darkness Take My Hand by Dennis Lane. And in that book, he has a beautiful 3-page prologue. It's in first person, and the main character is sort of setting the place for you to understand what happened. Yeah. And the prologue in that book takes place after the main events of the book. And so some people will say, oh, well, that's, a spoiler because the main character survived. But when you read that prologue, he survived, but he went through so much. Something traumatic and terrible happened to him. And I remember the last line of that prologue is, we don't talk about him anymore. He's done what he's done, and there's nothing more left to be said. And that felt so momentous, like it felt almost biblical. And so I wanted to do something like that with All the Sinners Bleed. I wanted to set the stage so that you realize, yes, Titus does survive, but he's gone through this monumental emotional and physical change. And so I started writing about that prologue. And so to differentiate my prologue from others, I started talking about the history of the town. I firmly believe that the South, America in general, the South and specifically, is really, it's haunted. It's haunted by its past. And, this famous quote from Flannery O'Connor that somebody asked her, was the South Christ-centered? And she's like, I don't know if it's Christ-centered, but it's definitely Christ-haunted. And it's haunted by hypocrisy. You can. I come from a small town that is 8,000 people, and there are 23 churches. Yeah. I know because I counted them. Yeah. And when I was doing research for this book, and there are churches that are churches that I know. Like it's 2023, nobody would stop me from going in there, but nobody would ask me to come back. And so I wanted to talk about how religion can be a comfort, it can be a crutch for people, but it can also be a cudgel. And so I wanted to show that. And to show that, I wanted to go back to the beginning of this town and show how over the years people have used the justification of religion, used justification of manifest destiny to excuse the atrocities that happen there. And so the circumstances of the book is just another season in this long season of pain that this town has gone through. So that's where the verbiage and the jargon in the prologue came from.
Now, I like how you give us a glimpse of a small town sheriff, and not just a small town sheriff just like what we see on television. So it's not a caricature. You get into his home life, right? You get into his relationship with his father, and that he is, I believe, the first black sheriff of this county that he grew up in. What was your thought process in trying to show the everyday life of someone who was a first?
So that's a good question. So for me, a part of showing like his everyday, sort of the mundane minutia of his everyday life was, I love the idea. I love comic books, right? And one of my favorite characters is Batman. I love Batman because Batman is just a dude. He's rich, but he's just a rich dude with indomitable will, you know? And I wanted to show Titus is a very strong character, physically and mentally. But I wanted to show, like, what does Batman do when he's not Batman? Yeah. You know, I always imagine, like, what's dinner time with him and Alfred like, where they're just sitting there, you know? And, like, you know, and he's all beat up and, you know, he can't raise his fork because the Joker done hit him with a pipe and stuff. And, and so I wanted to show Titus, like, the full facets of his personality. Yeah. So you see him at home with his dad, which is funny. Anybody that's read some of my other books, the father-son relationships are very complicated in the previous books. And, you know, like we were saying backstage, I was working through some things with that. And I'm in a much better place. Me and my dad are in a much better place now. And so when I started writing Titus and his dad, I was going to make it a little bit of a contentious relationship. Excuse me. And then there was a scene in the very beginning that I wrote. Like I said, it came out of nowhere. I wrote a scene where Titus's dad gives him a greeting card to celebrate his 1-year anniversary as sheriff. Yeah. But he couldn't find any that said, "Congratulations for being sheriff." So he found him an anniversary card. And when I wrote that scene, it sort of, to me, was very emblematic of their relationship. Yeah. That they love each other, they care about each other, and that I thought, you know, maybe it'd be really nice to show black men loving each other. You know, show a father and son who get along, who's not this sort of idea that a lot of media tries to portray, either black men not being in their sons' lives or black people not being able to come together. You know, if anybody saw the ruckus in Alabama a few months ago, we can come together when it's necessary. And so when I wrote those scenes, you know, his brother comes into it, his girlfriend is a part of it. Yeah. It's all these things. Like, he goes through so much darkness during the book, and his family and his home life and the people that care about him are sort of like this beacon for him through that darkness. So all these terrible things that he's confronting, that he's dealing with, when he comes home and his dad's, you know, cooking pork chops for him, it's the moment that he can relax. He can take off the mantle of being super cop and just be Titus.
Now, I like the name. His name is Titus Alexander Crown. I mean, that's a lot behind those names. Yeah. And it has just, you know, I thought about a titan. I thought about the leader, like what Alexander, a great leader, what that means. And was that your intent, or is that just the name that just came to you?
No, it was my intent. Names have a lot of power, I think.
Absolutely.
And in books, like in Blacktop Wasteland, I named the main character Beauregard Montage, because if you watch or you read or any type of media, a lot of times there's a stereotypical name given to, like, Confederate soldiers, you know, Jeb Beauregard Montage. And I wanted to take that name and sort of repurpose it, give it an African-American man, and show that, you know, just as, like, I think sometimes people think that if you're a black person in the South, that you sort of exist in this sort of submissive state, and nothing could be further from the truth. I live 30 minutes back home in Virginia from the former capital of the Confederacy. It takes a lot of will to live there. It takes a lot of will to stay there. Yeah. And so with Titus, I wanted to show with his name that he is a forthright guy. He is a morally strong person. Like a lot of my other characters, it's fun writing outlaws because they don't have to follow rules. Yeah. You know, they just got to not get caught. That's the only rule they got. And with Titus, I wanted to test somebody who does follow the rules. And so his name is emblematic of that. Like you said, Alexander the Great. Titus means like Titan or king. Same thing with crown. And so Walter Mosley has this great quote that everybody has morals until they're tested. And I wanted to show a character like Titus who gets tested but holds on to his morals. He's not perfect by any means, but I think he's a type of character. I like to think of him as like this knight errant, you know, and he stands in the gap between the people of his town and this terrible darkness that's trying to come to him. And a knight that has unblemished armor is a knight who's never been tested.
That's right. And I also noticed that throughout the book, he had a strong conviction of doing the right thing, of staying the course, even dealing with small town politics. Now, can you kind of tell us about Tell us about what you were intending for the reader to pull from dealing with small town politics in the South.
Just that a lot of small towns have a lot of big fish in small ponds.
Yeah.
And a lot of times when you have somebody who runs for the town council, the board of supervisors, it's not just about doing what's right for the town. It's sort of them trying to aggrandize themselves. A lot of times, just recently back home, we had a scandal on our board of supervisors that the people who ran a couple years ago who were, how shall we say, very, they leaned this way instead of that way. And so they made a lot of changes and all this stuff. And then we found out that 3 of them were trying to get this restaurant closed down because the 3 of them wanted to buy the restaurant and reopen it. And they did all this stuff. They bribed the building inspector to give them a bad rating, and the state had to come and get involved. And that happens so much in small towns, so much in small town politics. The thing about a small town is we're all so interconnected. Yeah. You know, we're all it's the great thing about small towns is everybody knows who you are. And the terrible thing about small town is everybody knows who you are. And so there's a lot of interconnectivity that exists behind the scenes. And so for me, I wanted to show Titus dealing with that. It's sort of almost wish fulfillment, because Titus is the type of character that just takes a knife to the red tape and just cuts through everything to get to the heart of the matter. That doesn't really happen a lot in real life. And so I wanted to show that and kind of give you an idea of what it's like living in a place where, imagine living in a place where people that you went to high school with who were dumber than you now control your fate. People that couldn't spell cat if you spot them the C and the T are just deciding what you're going to do with your town and your tax rate.
I think there are folks in there who are starting to think about some of the people they went to school with. So throughout the book, you have some really great one-liner kind of quotes that just kind of captures the scene that you've written. And one of them, I'm going to read your stuff back to you. One of them says, you wrote that for Titus, discipline was his crucifix against chaos. Is that something you think, were you thinking about your character as a law enforcement officer wanting that, or just his individual, I guess, qualities?
No, it's more about him as an individual. In the book, he loses his mother. That's not a spoiler. He loses his mother very early. And he's one of these people that he feels helpless. My mom used to, and I've lost my mom the last few years, but she used to say all the time, if you want to make God laugh, make a plan.
Yep.
And for Titus, he doesn't accept that. And he drives himself to make these plans come to fruition. And so that discipline, order, is sort of his new religion. He's an agnostic, leaning kind of toward atheist a little bit. And he doesn't accept religion as a way to move forward. He wants to shape his own path. And part of the story of the book is him learning to not be that way, to sort of understand that there's some things you can't do anything about. And we're all, sinners in the hands of an angry God, to quote Jonathan Edwards. Yeah. And sometimes you just got to ride that wave out. You can't control it, and you can't beat yourself up because you couldn't control it.
So before we start getting into the really heavy stuff, got to ask you this. The relationships that you write about is father-son, you talked about that, brother, romantic relationships, working relationships as the sheriff, and his relationship with the community. Which one did you enjoy writing about the most?
Him, his dad, his brother. That's the most fun.
Yeah.
I liked their relationship. Somebody who, one of my early readers, because I'm a very insecure writer, so when I write something, I send it to everybody I know. And it's is this good? Is that terrible? Am I wasting my time? And a bunch of people came back and told me, they said, the funny thing about Titus? The only time he really, truly laughs is when he's with his brother or his dad.
Yeah.
And that was subconscious. I didn't do that on purpose. And so that relationship, really, I love that they love each other. Even though they have problems like all families, they ultimately really care about each other. And again, I think it's important to show black men being able to do that, that it's not awkward to tell somebody. My dad is 78 years old, and he's a little older now. He walks on 2 canes. He used to be a fisherman. He's still got strong hands. His hands are strong as hell. It's ridiculous. I would not want him to slap me now, and I'm grown. But I remember I was going on tour in June, and I went by to see him, and he said something to me. He's like, "Oh, but don't work yourself too hard," or something like that. And I said to him, I said, I was kind of joking. I said, "Dad, I got to get out here and hustle these books, man." He grabbed my hand with that bare paw. He said to me, he's like, "No, you don't. All you got to do is take care of yourself." And, that sort of relationship, I think, is more prevalent than people think. So showing that in the book is sort of was really fun. I will say coming second to that one was his messy love life.
Yeah.
That was fun, right? If anybody who's read the book, and it's so funny, again, another point that my friends that had read the early draft said. So all the guy friends, they love Titus, they love his wits and the way he deduces crimes and stuff. But and my female friends, they love him, they love his relationship with his dad and stuff. But every one of my female friends was like, you know, you had no business going to that woman's house at 10 o'clock.
Yes, exactly. I was wondering if I could address that relationship. No, he did not.
I tell you, he's not perfect.
And so let's get into talking about Sharon. So throughout the book, like I mentioned before, you had great phrases, but here's one that resonated with me. Sharon's recent history, and this is the county, was indeed relatively quiet, but the past held the horrors and terrors that had moved into the realm of legend. And then you finish with a phrase from a local minister that said, Sharon was long overdue for a season of pain. When you were writing this book and trying to work out exactly what you were going to do, did you have an idea of how it would start, how it would end, or did you start in the middle and work your way back? How did that work for you as far as drafting it?
So for me, when I start to draft a book, I usually write myself a pretty detailed synopsis. I don't really outline. It's sort of like this sort of stream of consciousness thing that I'm just telling myself the story. And I kind of knew where it was going to end. I knew exactly how I wanted it to begin. It's the middle that gets messy, and muddy, and you kind of don't know how stories are going to go. And there are storylines that I thought were going to be important that kind of fades out, and there were storylines that I didn't see coming that played a big part of the book. But the main thing I wanted, and like I said before, I wanted to have this sort of Southern Gothic feel. And a big part of Southern Gothic feel is this sort of feeling that you're reading a legend, that you're reading something that's a myth or something that sort of has this sort of timeless quality to it. And so for me, the idea of Titus fighting this evil that comes to his town, I wanted it to feel mythic and biblical and epic all at the same time. I wanted it to be big. I wanted it to feel like he's up against something that he may not survive. There was a TV show that was a big influence on that book, True Detective Season 1. And there's a line in there where Russ Cole, Matthew McConaughey, says to Marty, Woody Harrelson, that we're the bad men that keep other bad men from the door. Yeah. I didn't want Titus to be a bad man. I wanted him to be a good man that kept bad men from the door. I love all my characters, and I think if you ask me who's my favorite character, I'd probably say Bug, because that was from my first book, and I wrote that book with nothing to lose. So there's a lot of crazy stuff in there with Bug that I'm proud of because I had nobody looking on my shoulder. Right. But I think if you ask me who I would like to have like a beer with, I think I'd like to talk to Titus. I think you could talk to Titus without worrying he got a body in the trunk. Like Bug, you're not gonna be sure. So you call Bug when you got a problem. Yeah. You call Titus when you got 2 tickets to a basketball game.
That's right. And so there is a crime, I guess, starting at the start of the book, and this was also mentioned. And so given the current events, and you said you started this with the death of George Floyd, were there scenes that were very hard to write about in this book?
Yeah, I think, so the book starts with Titus getting a call that there's been a shooting at a local high school. And it's not a mass shooting. A teacher has been murdered by a former student. Former student comes out, is confronted by Titus deputies, and then he's killed. The teacher's white, the student is black. And I wanted to sort of, I think, sadly, those events have become so commonplace that I wanted to show how quickly we move on from them. So you have this terrible thing, you have the kids running out of the school, and you have Titus, Titus leading the charge to confront this evil. And then, of course, he finds out some terrible things about the teacher and the former student. And I don't reference it again in the book. I did that on purpose because that's how we live our lives. Yeah. We have a mass shooting on Monday. We don't talk about it anymore after that. Maybe you'll see a few things about it on Tuesday, maybe Wednesday. By the weekend, we're moved on to the next thing, and sadly, there's another shooting. And so I wanted to show the show in a very small microcosm how we do that, how we become sort of taught to compartmentalize that. And even Titus does. They only mention it a few more times in the book. Of course, this other thing that comes up is so terrible and so awful. It takes a lot of their mental bandwidth. But it still, for me, was showing how we move past that so quickly. And so for me, that was important to show how that affects the people that are running toward the shooting and the people that run away from it.
And to tag on to that, you do show the part where the sheriff has to go talk to the family, right? That we hear about the investigations, but who goes and talks to the parents? And that scene was really raw and just kind of like the emotions of what people go through. Did you want to convey that to the reader in a way that was memorable, or in the way that was along the lines of what you said before, as far as people remember and then they don't?
The scene where he goes and talks to this former student's parents, I wanted to show not only the pain that these poor parents are going through that lost their child, but also the pain that Titus is going through. Because again, he feels like he failed him. He feels like he didn't do enough. He feels like he didn't fix it. And I think I've been guilty of that in my own personal life, of feeling like I didn't do enough. I didn't fix things the right way. And I wanted to show how that just weighs on you and how it weighs on Titus for the rest of the book. He feels that, and I don't say the great thing, but one of the things that I love about writing is you can address that. He can have a situation later where he moves past that. That doesn't always happen in real life. But that was a rough scene to write. That scene was very difficult, and in so much as that I think we all know somebody who's been touched by violence, by gun violence. Yeah. And there's a line from a movie I saw a long time ago that said, grief is not something you get over. Grief is something you go through. Yeah. And I think that's something that scene sort of is able to articulate, because, the parents of that young boy are not going to get over that. They go through it for the rest of the book, and Titus sort of goes through it with them in a way. Of course, obviously distance because he's not related to him. But again, he feels like he failed them, and that's what drives him. And for me, writing that scene was difficult. It was probably more difficult than some of the more violent scenes, because I wanted to just show how raw that nerve is, when you lose someone, and you lose someone unexpectedly.
Well, and I also like how you show Titus the leader of his department. And you show that I could see the different characters in my head. You have that character in the department that you can rely upon, right? That's the person who is your number two. And then you have the one that you wish that they would retire early. You wish they would go home. And you manage to kind of describe all the different parts. I won't ask, do you have anyone in mind when you're writing certain characters?
But you can ask that.
Did you have anyone in mind?
So the character of Roger is based on an old deputy that was the force in my hometown when I was a kid. Okay. Yeah, definitely. He was like a jerk, and he was mean to us all the time. He used to always roust us. Like, we would park our cars in the parking lot next to the football field, like after games and hanging out. And he would always come and break it up, and you got to move along. And we weren't doing anything. Because where we live in my hometown, the high school is right on the main highway. Yep. So nobody's drinking beer there. If you came to a field party, maybe you would find somebody drinking beer. And so anyway, he was just a terrible guy. And then a few years after I graduated, he got fired from the force because he was taking bribes. So it was like, couldn't happen to a nice guy.
Now, you also touch on issues that are current events. You talked about the removal or the discussion to remove a Confederate statue in that small town, and how there were different sides to that debate. Is that something that you also want to bring out for this as current events that are impacted? But it seems like, since this is kind of in between times and era, this could have happened at any time since the end of the Civil War. So what did you want us to get from that particular discussion?
That we should take down Civil War statues. Yeah. I think for me, I think some people, especially people who are Confederate apologists, will say, well, we can't take that down. That's our history. That's our heritage. I think they think that they get to define what Southern heritage is. Oh, yeah. My family has lived in my hometown of Virginia since 1851. My great-great-great-grandfather founded the church that I attend in 1867. So you don't get to tell me that your heritage is more important than mine.
Right.
And Southern heritage is not just the Civil War. Southern heritage is family. It's after church dinners. It's Saturday night football games. It's going to high school with the same people you started kindergarten with. It's this idea that we are connected to the nature and the world in a different way than anywhere else. You know, I grew up hunting and fishing, right? There's a shorthand, a language that you can talk to with Southern people. Doesn't matter if you're white or black. So if I say scrapple, you know what I'm talking about? Or chitlins, yeah, or venison, you know what that is? And so there's this sort of camaraderie that really exists in the South that some people think is less important than a 4-year hissy fit that some white landowners had. And so for me, I really wanted to bring that to the forefront and show that you have more in common with a black person from Virginia or North Carolina or South Carolina than you have with anyone else in anywhere other part of the country. And so I really wanted to have that discussion. We had the discussion in our hometown. And, you know, it's one of those things that I think we have been sort of cajoled into just going along with it. You know, only in America, only in the Civil War did the losers get to dictate how they were remembered. So...
one of the things you also touch base on is the relationship between the first black elected official and the black community, and support or lack thereof. What did you want us to take from that?
I think that I wanted to show that we as African Americans are not a monolith, you know, and so there are people that support Titus, that are black, that love him, that are proud of him. You know, for them, it's like Obama being elected. It's like seeing him as a sheriff, the first sheriff in the entire history of that county. But there are other people that feel like he's a traitor to the race. They feel like, oh, now you're not black or you're white, you're blue because you're wearing a police uniform. And Titus understands that, but I think it's hard for him to accept it. But the thing about Titus is, you know, somebody once told me good writing is putting a character in a tree and throwing rocks at him. Yeah. And with Titus, I think I threw bricks at him. But he can take it. And that's the thing that I love about him. And, you know, even though I wrote him, I think he came from some other place because he's got those, you know, his dad tells him, you got those broad shoulders for a reason, you know, and so he can take whatever they're throwing at him. And I love him for that. And I think for me, he never turns his back on the community, black or white, no matter what they do to him. He still stands in that gap between the darkness and the light for them. He sacrifices them, almost sacrifices his life to do the right thing. My grandfather used to say, doing the right thing is never easy, but it's always worth it. And I think Titus sort of exemplifies that.
Do we have any writers in the crowd? I can't really tell. Okay.
Clap if you're a writer.
Clap if you're a writer. We'll take it. Okay. The reason I ask is I wanted to ask about your writing process.
Okay.
And so how did this story come to you? And how did you know that it would be a novel or a short story?
I knew it was going to be a novel because there was so much stuff I wanted to talk about. It wasn't going to fit in a short story. I think for me, it came, like I said, it was a lot of inspiration. True Detective Season 1, Red Dragon, the book by Thomas Harris. Oh, yeah. But also like older movies like Sounder. And there's an old movie starring the late Jim Brown called Tick, Tick, Boom about a black Southern sheriff. And I just sort of wanted to meld all that together and sort of create this story. So for me, two things about me. I am the laziest writer on earth, so I don't like doing multiple drafts. I do one rough draft and then I finish it. I ain't got time to be doing multiple drafts. I got a life to live. I got a new Dodge Challenger I got to drive. I ain't got to be sitting there doing that. And I love writing. And also for me, I think it's most potent when I first write it down. Yeah. And so I write very visually. Like I see the story in my head like a movie. And so for me, I'm inspired by like photos. I know this is funny. I use Pinterest a lot. Because I'll go on Pinterest and I'll type up Southern Gothic aesthetic, or I'll type up small town photos, and then I'll write stories based on those photos, and then I'll coalesce those stories into the novel. I usually write, when I was writing on this book, I write 2 hours in daytime, in the morning, 2 hours in the evening, and that's it. I think if you push yourself, you sort of lose the narrative. You can't force the story out. Forcing the story out is like trying to force out a fart. It ain't gonna end well. And so after that process, like I said, I'm just saying, try to see what happened. And then I'll take it, and like I said, I'll send it to writers that I trust, other people that I trust. And my partner doesn't read my books because she doesn't like crime and violence and stuff. But I always let her read the last page to see if it closes well, and she's always going to be honest with me. So that's sort of the process.
Did you do any research as far as go for a ride or talk to someone or a friend or someone in law enforcement or anything like that?
So I had two main folks from law enforcement that I talked to. I talked to one of the first black sheriffs in Virginia, who's not that old, so it wasn't that long ago. He doesn't want to be named. He was like, don't say my name, but I'll talk to you. I was like, all right. And so and I talked to him a lot. And I also talked to a former police officer from Washington, D.C., the Arlington area, and I got a lot of good information from them. I have a friend who's a reporter for the LA Times who he got me a phone interview with a former FBI agent, because in the book, Titus is a former FBI agent. But that was all like cloak and dagger because the guy didn't want him to be named. So I had like we had to do a 3-way call, and he was using like a voice modulator. So like, I swear to God, I'd ask him a question. He's like, yes, that's true. And I'm like, so that was real funny. And then as far as any other research, I talked to psychologists about the psychology of people who have survived abuse, the psychology of sociopaths and stuff like that. So I don't like doing a lot of research. I do just enough that I can make what I'm talking about sound believable. Yeah. It's like, if you want like a real long dissertation on sociopaths, there's a lot of documentaries out there you can watch. I'm not trying to do that. I just want enough that you don't stop and say, oh, I don't think that happened. So it's like